Most people spend their entire working lives trying to reach $100,000 in savings. They cut subscriptions, they skip vacations, they move the number up by a few thousand every year and feel genuinely proud when they finally hit it. And they should. It is hard. It takes real discipline. But here's the part nobody talks about. Once you have $1,000,000, the game changes so completely that the rules you use to get to 100,000 become almost irrelevant. Not because you worked harder, not because you got luckier, because money at a certain size stops behaving like money and starts behaving like a machine. And the machine works whether you show up or not. Let us start with something uncomfortable. The median American household income right now sits at roughly $78,000 a year. That means the average family, working full-time, bringing in two incomes, paying taxes, covering rent or a mortgage, groceries, a car, insurance, childcare, has almost nothing left over at the end of the month. For most people, saving $100,000 does not take a year, it takes a decade. And during that decade, the person trying to save is fighting everything at once. Inflation is quietly eating the purchasing power of every dollar they hold. Their savings account is paying them 1 or 2% if they're lucky. Every financial emergency, a broken transmission, a medical bill, a job loss, resets the clock. The path to $100,000 is a straight uphill road with wet pavement. Now here's the absurdity. A person with $1 million sitting in a basic index fund tracking the S&P 500 earned, on average, roughly $100,000 last year, without working, without saving, without doing anything at all except existing in the right position. One person spent 10 years building what another person earned while sleeping. This is not a coincidence. It is a mechanism, and it has a name. It is called compounding, but not the motivational poster version, the real version, the one that is brutally indifferent to effort. Here's how it actually works. When you have a small amount of money, compounding is technically happening, but it's so slow it's almost invisible. If you invest $10,000 at an 8% annual return, after 1 year you have $10,800. You made $800. That's nice, but it won't change your life. Now imagine you have $1 million in the same account earning the same 8%. After 1 year, you have $1,080,000. You made $80,000 in 12 months without touching the principal. The math did not change. The percentage is identical. What changed is the base, and the base is everything. This is why the first 100,000 is genuinely the hardest number to reach, not because it requires more sacrifice, though it does, but because below a certain threshold, compounding barely registers as a force. You're essentially building by hand, brick by brick, while the wind is pushing against you. Inflation, taxes, life, all of it is working against a small pile of money. But once the pile reaches a critical mass, the wind starts working for you instead. Jeff Bezos was once asked what the most surprising thing about compounding was. His answer is worth sitting with. He said he couldn't understand why more people were not getting rich using it since the math was so obvious. Warren Buffett heard that and replied, almost quietly, because nobody wants to get rich slowly. That exchange contains everything. The system is not broken. It's not unfair in a random, chaotic way. It's structurally tilted toward people who already have enough to let the mechanism run. The wealthy do not get richer because they're smarter or more disciplined at the margin. They get richer because they crossed a threshold where the money compounds faster than they can reasonably spend it. Below that threshold, you're building. Above it, the machine is running. Now let's make this even more concrete, because the numbers tell a story that most people never see laid out clearly. Imagine two people, both 30 years old, both reasonably disciplined, both understand investing. Person A earns $60,000 a year, saves aggressively, puts away 15% of their income, which is $9,000 a year, and invests it all in a broad market index fund returning an average of 8% annually. By 40, they have roughly $130,000, real money, hard-earned. Person B starts at 30 with $1 million already invested. They do nothing. They add nothing. They let the 8% run. By 40, they have $2,159,000. Person A worked an entire decade and has $130,000. Person B did nothing and has over $2 million. Now, you might say that's not a fair comparison because person B started with $1 million, and you'd be right. That's exactly the point. The race is not between person A and person B. The race is between person A and time is patient in a way that humans are not. Here's where the irony sharpens. The strategies that wealthy people use to grow money are not complicated or secret. Index funds, tax-advantaged accounts, real estate leverage, dividend compounding, none of it is locked behind a velvet rope. The information is free, the vehicles are accessible, the math is public, and yet the wealth gap keeps widening. Not because the system is hidden, but because the system requires one thing that cannot be borrowed or finessed: enough capital to start. You can't compound nothing. You can't leverage an empty position. You can't weather a 10% market drop if a 10% drop wipes out your emergency fund. The entry fee to the machine is not knowledge, it is mass, it is size, it is having enough that losing some of it doesn't destroy the whole thing. This is the mechanism that most financial content quietly sidesteps, not because it's controversial, but because it's uncomfortable. It suggests that the advice to work harder and save more, while technically true and not wrong, is solving the wrong problem for most people. The goal is not to earn more. The goal is to cross the threshold where earning becomes optional. Now zoom out for a moment. In the United States, the top 1% of households hold roughly 30% of all financial wealth. The bottom 50% hold approximately 2.5% combined. These are not people who are 2 times more productive or 2 times more disciplined. The gap is not proportional to effort, it's exponential, and it's exponential precisely because of the mechanism we just described. Money above a certain size compounds, money below a certain size erodes. This is why studies consistently show that lottery winners who receive sudden large sums but lack the financial infrastructure to manage them often end up worse off within a few years, not because they are foolish, because you can't just drop someone into the machine without the knowledge of how to run it. The machine requires understanding, not just money. And this is also why inherited wealth compounds across generations in ways that earned income almost never does. A trust fund is not just money, it's a head start so large that the recipient begins life already above the threshold. So where does that leave the person still trying to reach 100,000? It leaves them with a harder but more honest map. The first milestone is not about return rates or investment strategies, it is about survival and accumulation. The goal is to protect what you are building from everything that is trying to dissolve it: inflation, bad debt, unnecessary spending, and catastrophic risk. Emergency funds are not boring, they are shields. Avoiding high-interest debt is not conservative, it is math. Because a credit card charging 22% interest is the inverse of compounding, working violently against you. Once you cross the threshold, once the machine turns on, the discipline required actually decreases, not because you become wiser, but because the math takes over. 100,000 is hard because you are carrying it entirely yourself. 1 million is easier because the money starts carrying you. Here is the question worth sitting with after this. If the mechanism is this well understood, if the math is this visible, if the strategies are this accessible, why does the system keep producing the same outcome? Why does each generation largely inherit the financial position of the previous one, with relatively few people crossing from one side of the threshold to the other? Is it a failure of education? A failure of access? A failure of wages relative to the cost of building a base in the first place? Or is the uncomfortable answer that the machine is working exactly as designed? Not designed by anyone in particular, not as a conspiracy, but as a natural consequence of a system where the rules of money favor mass over effort, scale over labor, and time in the market over time at work. The first 100,000 is hard. The first million is easier. And what that says about how the whole thing is built is a question worth asking, even if the answer is one none of us are fully comfortable with.